introduction, Suresh, and thank you to both of you representing, of course, Sangam for kindly hosting the event. Great to have all of you here. I hope that we'll have a good conversation. As I understand, the topic that we're all here for is India and Indians in the global economy. So we should, of course, start with that, what's happening around the globe. And then we might look briefly at what's happening in India, what's happening to Indians. And I don't know what your interest is in the topic. Your interest in the topic might be academic, in which case there's lots to follow up. But it could be that your interest is rather personal. I'm finishing my degree, whether it's an undergraduate degree, master's, doctoral, postdoc, doesn't matter. Am I going to find a job? And if I find a job, be great. Any kind of job might be great, but are there sectors perhaps I should be thinking more about? And if so, what are those sectors? And then, depending on what your interests are, we can go further. So I'll make kind of short opening statements, and then depending on your interests, we can take the discussion wherever you want. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. So what's happening around the global economy is briefly, well, let's stop for a moment and let's just think that in a few hours, the US government might be shutting down. And if in a few hours the government does, which we hope, of course, does not happen, we pray it doesn't happen because it's not good for anybody. But let's just think back to the last time it happened. Was that 96, 95, twice the government shut down, you remember. What was the impact of that? Actually, not very much. In one occasion, the economy grew by 0.1%, and you could argue that's not a lot. On the other occasion, it grew 1.3%, which is not bad, considering the government is shut down. But of course, at that time, the economy was booming, right? And now the economy is not booming, so we can't say that this time we should expect growth. Maybe it takes place, maybe it doesn't. And of course, the reason why nobody knows what the impact is going to be of a government shutdown, if that happens, the reason why nobody knows what the impact will be is because the economy as a whole in the globe is in a very strange place. It's in a very strange place where it's never been before. What do I mean when I say that the economy is in a very strange place? Well, we indulged in a number of economic experiments, financial experiments, over the last 20 or 30 years, as a result of which enormous growth took place. That was obviously the good side. The bad side was that because these experiments had never been tried before, and because we all knew what the theoretical consequences of these experiments would be, we, of course, hoped to be able to manage the downside. We did manage the downside relatively well for 20, 25, 30 years, depending on when you consider the experiments actually started. But at some point, we couldn't manage it anymore, and the result was, of course, the crisis of 2007 onwards. A lot of economists say 2008 onwards, but really the crisis started in 2007. The reason the crisis started in 2007 was because banks stopped trusting each other. Banks did not stop trusting corporates or customers. They stopped trusting each other. They didn't stop trusting the government. They stopped trusting each other. Now, if banks stop trusting each other, who do you trust? I mean, banks are supposed to be solid, right? Companies may not be solid. You and I may not be solid, right? We can die, we can go bankrupt, lots of things can happen to us. But if banks can go bankrupt, then we better watch out. And the issue in 2007 was nobody knew which bank was solid. You know, if you know that I'm not solid, I'm likely to go bankrupt, very easy, you just stop doing business with me. But if you don't know which of us is going to go bankrupt, we stop doing business with everybody. That's what happened in 2007. Nobody knew which bank was going to go bankrupt. This is a very strange state of affairs. Everybody thinks any of the other banks could go bankrupt. We had never been in that situation before in the global economy. How come we got in that situation? How come that in an economy and in a system which is meant to be transparent, at least in terms of finance, we reached a level of opaqueness where even the banks didn't understand what was going on? Well, the reason we reached that state was these economic experiments to which I'm referring. What were these economic experiments? There were several of them. We can look at any of them in detail if you wish. But let's start with the idea that a currency does not need to have anything behind it except faith. Now, if that's not religion, what is? But you know, when that happened, I didn't hear anybody shouting and screaming, neither the Muslims in the Middle East, nor the Hindus, nor our Hindu people in India, nor the Christians in this country. You know, nobody shouted and screamed and said, hey, 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 hang on, something's going wrong. Why did nobody shout? Well, because a lot of guys didn't understand what was going on, whether they're Hindus or Muslims or atheists or whatever. A lot of guys didn't understand what was going on. That was one thing. The other thing was the people who did understand what was going on were looking, of course, at the benefits. They were also looking at the disbenefits of having an economy which is based on gold. What's the disbenefit of having an economy based on gold? You don't have enough gold, you can't print enough money. Economy is growing, you need more money to make the economy function, you can't print more money. Problem one. But a bigger problem than that was, of course, the US national debt. Remember that at the end of Second World War, US had become the dominant economy in the world, right? It had become the country with the almighty dollar. And yet in a very few years, it went from being the almighty dollar to the not-so-certain dollar. How come? Well, the reason was actually the Vietnam War. Now, please, I'm not making political statements, right? So far as the US is concerned, I'm not a US citizen. I'm not going to settle down in this country, right? I observe the US as an outsider. So I'm relatively objective. I'm not Republican. I'm not Democrat. I'm relatively objective. Whatever your views about the rightness or wrongness of the Vietnam War, the economic consequence was that the US ran up for the first time in its history an enormous debt. And the question was it going to pay that debt back in dollars worth, what the dollars were worth when the debt was taken? Or would it like to have the option of paying the same debt nominally, 100 million, let's say, had been borrowed, we pay back 100 million, but pay that 100 million back in deflated dollars. So the nominal value is the same, but the real value is less. If you wanted to play that game, the easy way to do that was delink the currency from gold. You can then print as much money as you want. The value of your dollar goes down. You're still paying the 100 million back that you owe, but actually you're not paying back the 100 million. Totally immoral game, right? But totally legal. Contract was 100 million, we're paying back 100 million. What's the problem? But no morality in it. But at that time, nobody was asking the moral questions, everybody was asking the economic questions. Now the challenge is the following for the global economy. If America can play this game, why should England not play this game? Why should Germany not play this? Why should India not play this game? So everybody started playing this game. Now, if everybody can start playing this game, then the advantage of the game disappears. You know, if I cheat, let's say baseball, I have an advantage for a short time. But if everybody cheats, I have no advantage. Cheating only has an advantage if I'm the only cheater. Right? So I'm exaggerating and putting it in simplistic terms, but I hope you understand what I'm saying. This was the first trick we played, which had global consequences, which was one of the things that came to have its effect in 2007, and this is not a game that we have stopped playing. In fact, the latest player to join the game, after having resisted the game for a very long time, and having paid the consequence of not having joined the game for a very long time, is Japan. Japan didn't play that game for a very long time. It has recently joined the game. And now Japan is also printing as much money as you like. I mean, I'm exaggerating. Of course, you don't print as much money as you like. You try to manage the printing in such a way that you control the inflation and therefore you try to print enough dollars to stimulate the economy while at the same time applying the brake of interest rates so that the speed of growth of the economy slows down. This is a clever game to play, and of course we have very sophisticated instruments with which to control this game. And yet, at the end of the day, what we're relying upon is sophisticated tools. You know that junk into a tool, computer or whatever, means junk out. So your figures that go into your computers are not reliable, then the conclusions will not be reliable. And the second game that we started playing after manipulating our currency was actually manipulating information. So what is the true rate of unemployment in the United States? Nobody knows. And the reason nobody knows is because we keep experimenting, playing, politicking about what the correct definition of unemployment is. So there are official figures of unemployment, there are unofficial estimates about unemployment. Nobody knows really what's going on. So if the United States can play this game about fudging the figures on unemployment because it's to your political advantage at any particular moment, is there any reason why India shouldn't play that game, or China shouldn't play that game, or any other country shouldn't play the game? So every country is now fudging figures. We don't actually know what's going on. So in the absence of reliable figures, obviously it becomes much more difficult to manage this very complex game that we're trying to play of printing a lot of money and at the same time manipulating the interest rates to make sure that we are growing as fast as we can, but not allowing growth to get out of hand, so inflation gets out of hand. In other words, the value of your currency drops faster than it should. And I could go on and talk about other games that we've played, such as leverage, such as gambling. We call it speculation. I mean, there's nothing wrong economically with gambling. Morally, you can argue about gambling, but economically, there's nothing wrong with gambling. You know, if you have a vast amount of wealth and you want to have your fun at a weekend in Las Vegas, you want to go and blow it, well, I mean, you know, you can afford to blow it, so you can ask moral questions about it, but economically there's nothing wrong, you're still very rich. What's wrong with that? But if you don't have anything and you then start gambling with what you even don't have, that's a problem. If you start borrowing to gamble, it's even more crazy, right? But that's what we started doing as countries. Till 1999, it was not possible legally. It was not possible in the United States to gamble with the savings of people like you sitting around the room here in the United States, because there was something, an act, which actually prevented that from happening, called the Glass-Steagall Act, which was in place since the 1930s. But in 1999, that act was removed because people thought you could make a lot of money by gambling, speculation. Economy was booming, everything was going fine. Why should we have to gamble, speculate only with the money of rich people or rich institutions? Because that's what the law said. You could gamble, speculate, but you could speculate only with institutional funds or with the funds of people who were extremely rich, who could afford to take the risk, who knew and understood, as a result of education, what kinds of risks they were taking, or didn't care and had their advisors who knew what was going on. But in 1999, we changed the rules, at least in the United States, and said, oh, now that the economy is going so well and everybody can make a lot of money through speculation, that is gambling, we should not gamble only with these large institutional funds and the funds of very rich people. We should also be able to speculate with the savings that you and I have in normal banks. Not only that, municipal corporations who were prevented from gambling in this way could gamble. Did you hear anybody preaching about it? Did you hear big political debates about this issue? Most of these things happened because the elite between them cobbled things up, and the big television debates and newspaper debates were not taking place about these key issues. There were a few idiots like me shouting from Europe, but one or two guys like Ravi Batra, our own Ravi Batra here in Southern Methodist University, and one or two others were talking about it, but who was listening? Iceland, the country, went bankrupt. for this reason. Greece is in the kind of trouble that it has been. Spain is in the kind of trouble it has been because of these reasons. Once you start gambling with the money of ordinary people, once you start gambling with the money that municipalities have or states have or countries have, then you're going to have the consequences of that speculation or gambling. You will win sometimes, when you win you make money, you will lose sometimes, and when you lose at the kind of scale that leverage now allows you to lose, then of course you go bankrupt. Leverage, by the way, is a technical term. It simply means how much money you've got to put on the table in order to be able to take a larger bet than the amount of money you put on the table. So when you buy a house, for example, on a mortgage, you get the house, but you don't put the full value of the house down, right? I mean, not normally. You're very rich, of course, you can do that, but most people don't do that. They put down 10% or 20% or whatever, and they borrow 80% or 90%. In good times, 110% of what the house is worth. And that's called leverage. You know, the proportion of what you put down versus the leverage that you can get for that gambling. Of course, in the case of buying a house, you're not really gambling. You're taking an educated guess that the house will not lose value, may make value, may add some value. But in the case of a lot of the trades that were happening, it was pure gambling. So we can go on and on about these kinds of experiments that we launched in the global economy. There's something called securitization and so on that we can go into if you want. But it was not just one thing. It was a whole slew of things which systematically corrupted the US economy. And as a result of corrupting the US economy, of course, corrupted the rest of the world, because the US is still, believe it or not, sitting here in the United States, you may not believe it, it is still the lead economy in the world. What happens in the United States affects everything else that happens around the world. So, 2007, everything started hitting the fan, and the question was what was going to happen. So in the United States, there was big political noise. We've got to reform the global system. We've got to reform everything in the United States. Different people took different positions on the issue. And for good reasons and bad, we had something called the Dodd-Frank Act, even though Frank was the lead guy to start with. It's now called the Dodd-Frank Act for alphabetical reasons. So the Dodd-Frank Act was meant to clean up all these kinds of issues in the United States. Not completely, of course, not perfectly, of course, but it was meant to sort things out. And of course, what's happened since then is that the political bickering between the two parties has stopped any substantial implementation of the Dodd-Frank Act. Meanwhile, similar things have, of course, been proposed and passed in different parts of the world. But the only part of the world which is trying to sort itself out really is Europe. Europe has always been relatively conservative. If you compare growth rates in the United States with growth rates in Europe, you will see that American economists do not understand Europe and what's happening around the European economy. But all that you need to do is only look at the figures, and you will see that the US economy booms and grows 10%, 12%, 15%, and European economies are growing at 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%, 8% if you're very lucky. Do come in. And the US economy busts, and of course European economies decline, but they decline to 1%, 2%. They don't really tend to decline very much more than that. So the US tends to boom and bust. Europe tends to be relatively steady. You can take your choice. And it's, of course, at the end of the day, a moral choice. It's a cultural choice. It presents itself in economic terms, but it's actually deep down a matter of what values you hold. Europe holds different values compared to the United States. You may like those, you may dislike those, but that's the fact of the matter. Sorry. That's the fact of the matter. So, the Dodd-Frank Act has never been properly implemented. Little bits and pieces have been done, but international legislation has been going ahead. European legislation has been going ahead and is a little more effective than has been the case in the United States. Having said all that, the global economy is still not really out of the doldrums, meaning that the fundamental issues which affected us are still there. What we've tried to do is paper over the cracks, or if you like a different kind of metaphor, put a floor under the crisis so that the crisis didn't end up completely shattering the whole of the global economy. And the technique we used to do that was essentially to print even more money than we were printing earlier. Make these big banks that were supposed to be too big to fail even more too big to fail. So we resorted to the same medicine which got us into trouble in the first place. The result is that the economy is kind of stumbling along, and if you read the newspapers, which I'm sure you and I do, or if you follow things on the internet, which I'm sure you and I all do, if you watch television debates, which I'm sure you all do from time to time, you get the impression, things getting worse. Weren't they getting better? Now, what's really happening? What's happening is we're going sideways. Things are not really improving, they're not getting worse, we're kind of stuck at a certain level. And when a little tremor takes place and things go up, everybody starts shouting, things are getting better. Little tremor takes place and things go back, everybody starts shouting, it's getting worse. But actually, it's not really getting that much better, and it's not getting that much worse. So, what's likely to happen? It depends partly in the United States. Do you have a shutdown tonight or not? With whatever consequences that has, but clearly some of the consequences are clear. US dollar goes down if you do have a shutdown. Stocks go down, clearly. Bonds go up, clearly, because everybody's looking for security and don't want to speculate too much. So treasuries go up. The kind of foreign money which is flowing into the US slows down and flows instead into Switzerland. Switzerland is very happy, thank you very much. Flows into Japan. You may not believe it, having heard probably a lot of stuff about what's wrong with the Japanese economy. It's been essentially flat since 1980 till, as I said, till very recently when I joined this game of printing more money. But it's still regarded as a safe haven. There are kind of basically 3 safe havens in the world. So when things are going wrong, if you're anywhere in the world, you put your money into these 3 safe havens. One is the United States, second is Switzerland, third is Japan. When things are going well, you can put your money in the not-so-safe areas, because it's in the not-so-safe areas that more growth potentially takes place at a higher risk. There's always a relationship between risk and reward, right? You take more risk, chances are you'll get shot. But if you don't get shot, chances are you make money. So when the economy is booming, it's a great time to put your money in emerging markets. When the economy is shrinking, you want to get out of emerging markets. But the trouble is, very often you can't. A friend of mine put it this way, not a friend of mine, he was a very senior banker. I dare not call him my friend. He was more like a boss. Once put it like this at a conference that I was at. He said, emerging markets are markets from which it is very difficult to emerge in an emergency. It's a very good definition. But of course, that's where you make your money as long as the economy is going well. So, we are not in a situation where the economy is booming. We are in a situation where economies are withdrawing, shrinking, maybe kind of collapsing, depending on which country we're talking about. Therefore, of course, the money will flow from these countries legally and illegally into safe havens. That's the reason Swiss dollar picks up, Swiss franc picks up, Japanese yen picks up, US dollar picks up. It's not because US is doing anything right. It's because it's a global crisis, and in any time of global crisis, that's going to happen. When I said that at the Arizona Council of Economic Education almost exactly 2 years ago, nobody agreed with me. Surprise. I mean, it's kind of basic. But nobody believed it was going to happen because, of course, US economists at that stage did not believe that. On the left, they didn't believe that for political reasons. On the right, they didn't believe that for political reasons. So it's very strange that American academia is so now thoroughly imbued with politics that it does not look at facts in the face, very simple, common sense facts in the face. I'm sorry to say this in a US academic institution, but that's the reality. What's going to happen to the global economy? One factor, do you shut down tonight or not? Second factor, if you don't shut down, which I hope obviously does not happen, then what is happening in Europe. Europe has set itself a program which, as I said, America does not understand, but which is meant to put the euro on a stable base. It's a very strange currency. It's never existed before. 17 countries, 23 if you want to look at it a different way, sovereign nations decide to create a common currency with a central bank. So you have a central bank trying to regulate a currency which is actually controlled by 17, 18, 19, 20, 23, whatever, depending on how you look at it, sovereign states. Each of whom sets its own budget, each of whom sets its own tax, each of whom is responsible for its own environmental legislation, pension funds, minimum wage, and everything else. Very strange. Never happened before in history, another economic experiment. Well, as long as the economy was booming, it went well. As soon as the economy busted in 2007, what kind of currency is this? Is it stable? Is it going to last? Is Greece going to pull out? Portugal going to pull out? Is Germany strong enough? Etc. And so they realized, some of us have been shouting about it for some time, that you can't have a currency like this. You need to sort it out and make up your mind. Either you're a currency, in which case you need politics behind it to line up behind it, or you're not a currency and you should split. By that stage, of course, the costs of splitting were so high that nobody wanted to pay the cost of splitting. A simple economic fact that American economists refused to understand. And so you had a lot of speculation and a lot of talk and a lot of betting, actual betting, that the euro would collapse. Which is crazy because currencies are political projects. Currencies are not economic projects. Currencies are political projects. Europe had decided to create the euro, and the cost of withdrawing from it was so huge, nobody's going to pay that cost. It was much cheaper to pay what you needed to pay to keep Greece going and Spain going and Italy going and so on, Southern Europe and the Eastern Fringe. It was much cheaper to just pay for that than to break up the euro. Simple economic fact. You think any American economist would understand it? Any American politician would understand it? No, don't want to understand it. Why don't you want to understand it? Because it is a threat to the dominance of the dollar. And we've got enough threats to the dominance of the dollar, thank you very much. We don't want another threat to the dominance of the dollar. But of course, from a global point of view, the question is, if America is not going to drive the global economy, what is? Maybe, if Europe is lucky, gets all its ducks in line, as we like to say in British English, then it could be that the euro area becomes a driving engine, an engine that drives the global economy. What about China, you say? What about Japan? What about India? We can go through all that. It would take a long time. Maybe it interests you, maybe it doesn't. Briefly, my conclusion is we do not have a driver for the global economy right now, and that is one of the problems that we face. America could be that driver, Europe could be that driver, China could be that driver, Japan, India could be those drivers, but what we lack is political consensus, what we lack is political will to actually drive economic change, even political consensus, necessary for economic change in order to get those economies moving. I've probably said enough about the global economy. You want to come back on particular things, please do. I want to now move on to India and Indians in this global economy. Well, tomorrow is the day you want full facts and figures, come to that. But just briefly, we've had all kinds of problems that you know about in the last few months, particularly. Why have we had these problems in the last few months? Well, BJP and Congress, you know, again, we have the same problem in India, with political divides and so on, like to shoot at each other. And nobody wants to say to you what the real truth is. And the real truth is, as I've already hinted, when the economy globally goes well, you want to put money, some of your money, in more risky areas. And we, being Indians, don't like admitting India is a risky area. It's a developing economy. China is a risky area. It's a developing economy. But the moment risk starts, what happens? You withdraw to safe havens. Most capital in the world is American and European. Where will it go back to? America and Europe. Money comes out of these economies, what happens? Rupee drops. Which Indian politician wants to tell you the future, the fate of the rupee is not in our hands? Who wants to tell you that? We're a proud people. We're very prickly people, very sensitive people. Who wants to admit that the rupee is not in our control? Of course, we can do a few things. Raghuram Rajan, now the guy who runs the Reserve Bank of India, has done a few good things. We could do more good things like that. But the problem in our country is you're not allowed to do good things. So whether it's elementary things like we are in a university, so I guess we should talk about university-related things at least for a moment. Kapil Sibal, our law minister, I mean, he's a good guy in some ways, bad guy in some ways. You can be pro-Congress and praise him. You can be pro-BJP and attack him. But the fact is he's the law minister. And as the law minister, he should be respected. If you may not like all his policies, that's a different matter. But he's the law minister. He proposes that we have a unified examination system for the whole country for admission to universities. You may like the idea, you may dislike the idea. But from a student point of view, it makes sense. Why do I have to sit 16 different exams to get into higher education once I've already been through the school exam system? Now, I want to get into the IIT, I have to go and sit IIT exam. I want to get into IIM, I have to go and sit IIM exams. I want to join the medical school, I have to go and sit a medical school. It doesn't make sense. Also from the point of view of national integration, it helps if there's a single unified exam. It's kind of common sense, right? You can be against it for various reasons, and I have my own reservations about it. But the fact is that it was opposed simply because it had been put forward by Congress. Not on the basis of any rational analysis of what could go wrong with it, or might go wrong with it, how it could be improved, and so on. Just opposed for political reasons. You know and I know, if we are from India, there's a lot of educational malpractice going on in India. Right? Kapil Sibal proposed an educational malpractices bill. Opposed because it's Kapil Sibal and Congress. So, good ideas or bad ideas, if they come from one party, will be opposed by the other party. Same in this country, same in America. Democrats propose something, Republicans will be against. Republicans produce, Democrats are against. How can a nation move forward if a country is politically paralyzed? It is impossible. So, the challenge is that of recovering the roots of democracy, and the roots of democracy lie in two things. Civil discourse, and we seem to have lost civil discourse more and more, both in America and in India. A basic admission that you have the interests of the country at heart just as I have the interests of the country at heart, even if that may not actually be the case. At least for purpose of discussion, I have to grant you that you have the interests of the country at heart, and not attack you simply because you come from the other party. Because if we go down this route very much further, then we end up in Pakistan. And what is wrong with Pakistan? It's not that it's a Muslim country. What is wrong with Pakistan is you do not have basic civility of this sort. If I disagree with you, I stick a knife in your back, or I put a bomb under your feet. That is not the way you build nations. You build nations by tolerating differences, respecting differences, reaching a consensus, finding out what is in your interest, what is in my interest, and building on what is of mutual interest. But at the moment, it's become, both in America and in India, a winner takes all kind of game, and loser loses all kind of game. And because of that, we have the kind of political paralysis we do. It goes back to very deep questions of morality. It goes back to very deep questions of values. It goes back to very deep questions of training. And ultimately, it's a kind of, if you like, spiritual, cultural, emotional issue. Am I in the game of being American or Indian simply for what I can get out of it? I can get out of it, and the nation go hang, others go hang. Or am I in the game of increasing the value of this pie so that you might get 60%, I might get 40%. You might get 70%, I might get 30% today. But tomorrow I hope that it will be reversed and, it will then be even. Tomorrow you might get 70%, I might get 30%. So, but that kind of tolerance, that kind of mutual give and take just seems to be disappearing from our discourse. So So India has huge potential, has always had huge potential, but we've consistently shot ourselves in the foot, and we seem to have made some progress since independence for at least a few years, but we seem to have got back into the game of shooting ourselves in the foot. Until we can learn to stop shooting ourselves in the foot, things won't improve. In spite of that, several good things have happened. So if you look at the land acquisition bill, which has recently gone through Parliament, in spite of the political differences, land acquisition bill, which is a game changer in India. You may not like it. Corporates don't like it. Yeah? People of India like it. That's not the issue. But it's a game changer for Indian economics. It's a game changer for Indian society. How much debate have you had about it? Even before the bill went through, there was hardly any discussion. After the bill has gone through, there's hardly any discussion. You get kind of guerrilla shots at it from time to time, but you don't get any substantial debate about it. Okay, don't look at the Land Acquisition Act. You can look at the Food Security Bill. The only discussion you get is, any scheme of the government of India is so riddled with corruption that it's never going to work. Hey, if that is your belief, why are you in politics? Why are you in India if you believe that no government scheme can work? Of course, we have the problem of corruption, that is clear. But if you look at the facts, you will see that corruption, though it's severe and is in some areas increasing, in other areas is decreasing. There are areas where corruption is going down. And unfortunately, in our national discourse in India, we've specialized in sensationalizing the failures and not looking at the successes. I can point out lots of successes to you, but who knows about them? You can look at the recent bill which prohibits manual scavenging. It's been a disgrace for our country that people have to go and clean shit with their own hands every morning. There's a caste of people whose job has been for generations to do that. Now we've had the guts to say this should be forbidden. We should be proud that we finally arrived at a stage of civilization where we say this thing is not necessary, is bad, should be banned. Who is proud about it? We should be proud about it. We've mistreated our forest dwellers for generations. Now we have for the first time a bill that prevents us from exploiting our forest dwellers. Scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, particularly scheduled tribes and forest dwellers. We should be happy we've got such a bill. Who's talking about it? Who's proud about it? Who knows about it? So, we've done some very positive things just in the last few weeks and months. We've done some very positive things. Of course, there are lots of good things we could have done, we've not done. We could have made the Central Bureau of Investigation independent. We could have gone in for the Lokpal. I'm not a great believer in the Lokpal, but we could have gone in for the Lokpal. We have not done it. Lokpal is a kind of, how would you describe it? A kind of an ombudsman, right? We could have set in place an ombudsman. We haven't been able to do it. So we can go through all the things we've failed to do so far, and we Indians specialize in going through all the things that we've not done so far. But we've done a lot of things, so let's be a little bit more balanced about it. And the great issue for India is, of course, the coming elections. 8 months at the most, is it? 8 months now? May is the official last date at which elections can be held. Could be held theoretically within, officially I think it's 3 months notice is to be given, so any time between 3 months and 7 months is the time that the next national elections will be held. What happens? One of the reasons we are in the doldrums is because nobody knows what happens in these elections. One of the reasons why money moved out of India so fast, faster than any other country in the world, by the way, was because we don't know what's going to happen at these elections. In other words, in the US, for example, if the Democrats win or Republicans win, it's not basically going to change the shape of the country, not in the next 1 or 2 years. Lots of things could be positive or negative, but it's not going to change the shape of the country. In India, it could change the shape of the country. We don't know in which direction. It could change the shape of the country in the following way. Government gets completely paralyzed because we can't have a government. In other words, there's no clear majority. And if there's no clear majority, which seems to be the most likely outcome, then you are stuck with a consensus government or a coalition government of the sort that we've had for the last several years. And coalition governments in India have not shown themselves to be spectacularly successful. There are places where they're spectacularly successful. India is not one of them. So the question is, will we have a functioning government in 7 months' time, 8 months' time, whatever it is in India? And I personally don't care if it's BJP or Congress or some third force. All I'm interested in, if I'm an Indian citizen, is the government working? Is it delivering something? And because that is not yet clear, neither the Indian citizen nor the foreign investor has the confidence to be able to invest. But that will become clear in a few weeks or months, so we shall see what happens. 7 months, 6 months. A week is a long time in politics, we were told, right? So lots of things can happen. People can die, there can be accidents, there can be migrations from one party to the other, third fronts can come up. Lots of things can happen. So let's see what happens. That's one side. The other side is Indians have come to the United States and have done very well for themselves. Broadly speaking, there are obviously exceptions, but broadly speaking, Indians have done, in fact, better for themselves than most other communities that have emigrated into this country in the last 20, 30 years. But we have done well for ourselves in the context of an expanding economy. Now that the economy is not expanding so fast, the question is, what will happen? Well, because primarily of the communitarian nature of Indian peoples, we tend to move in packs, we are not individual hunters, generally speaking. I think the impact will be relatively moderate. But that doesn't mean individuals won't be hurt or harmed by the situation as it is on the ground. So I come to the question that's probably closest to your heart before I close my kind of brief presentation, even though it's longer than I thought it was going to be. And that is, if you are at the cusp of trying to find a new job, which areas should you look at? What areas should you go in, if you have a choice? And I have 3 recommendations to make to you. One may strike you as odd, and that is, if you have a choice, go into logistics. Why go into logistics? Any branch of logistics. Because the global supply chains are being reshaped very fast. They were being reshaped in the direction of globalization as a result of globalization. Now the deglobalization is taking place. We won't go back to the old ways of organizing the globe. We'll go to some new ways of organizing the globe. And therefore, the old structures that served us before globalization took place are not what we'll go back to. And as these new structures will have to be placed, the whole area of logistics is an enormous field to go into. And from my perspective, we can debate this if you want, is actually a better field to go into than IT. And the reason for that is because IT is slowly itself getting automated. Logistics still requires human creativity and organization of a different sort. So if you have a choice, logistics rather than IT, IT is not a bad field to be in, but I'm just saying if you have a choice. The second field to look at is marketing. If you're the kind of person who's a good marketer, go into marketing. And the reason to go into marketing is that we have product and service oversupply in the global marketplace. And when that happens, then it's up to the marketer to enable the impact to happen and for the products to be sold. Competition now globally is so severe that there is overproduction taking place at an enormous level. The Chinese thought they had the game right and therefore went out and bought everything they could, but didn't realize that if the economy went down, they'd be sitting on overcapacity. So now the Chinese are playing the game of how to expel foreign companies so that Chinese manufacturers can at least look after the Chinese market, if not come even further into European and American markets. First area, logistics, think seriously about it. Second area, marketing. Third area is anything creative. And the reason to go into something creative is because that is another area that robotics can't touch. So the word robotics has come up a couple of times in what I've said so far. What's so special or interesting about robotics? What's special and interesting about it is that robotics replaced blue-collar jobs in the 1980s. It is now replacing and will replace increasingly white-collar jobs. The jobs of analysts, the jobs of traders, the jobs of lawyers, the jobs of football players, the jobs of whatever, airline pilots. These are skilled jobs, brain surgeons. These are highly skilled jobs that are all being automated. What cannot be automated, as far as we know at present, from computers, by computers, is creativity. So if you get a job, you get any opportunity to go into creative field, design field, go into that field. These are three areas that will do very well in the kind of 5, 10, 15-year time frame, which is what interests most of us. Beyond that, we cannot see, but this is what we can see. We may not see what's happening next week because it's too close to us, but we can get a good idea of what's happening 5, 10, 15 years. And that's what I see happening in the next 5, 10, 15 years ahead. So I'll stop there. Questions and answers, whatever. Comments, disagreements, stories, jokes. All welcome. What time do we stop, by the way? 8 o'clock, 7:30? 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, midnight? 8 o'clock, good. So we've got kind of half an hour, 40 minutes. Questions, comments, please.
I don't go into the global economy. I just want to know about your perspective on the Indian side. So you need to say that you support the food security bill, right? Okay, and how do you think about FDI, your point of view?
Foreign direct investment is good if foreign direct investment is going to be actually invested in the country and is not a short-term adventure into the country to make as much money as you can before you get out as fast as you can. A lot of FDI is what's called hot money. It goes in as portfolio flows. It doesn't actually get invested in the country. So things like the chain retail stores, FDI, I'm not talking about it from a national point of view. That's a different issue. I'm just answering your question about FDI. If it's that kind of FDI where the cash goes in and creates a factory, creates a chain of logistics, creates shops, creates jobs, that kind of money gets invested in a country. Actually, that is good stuff.
But do you think that there is possible?
You mean right now?
Yeah, you mean like if FDI is implemented in India, then yes. What you expect is it really will be possible that?
It depends on the rules you set up. The Chinese set up rules in a very clever way, so most of the money that's gone into China is actually sunk in factories. We were not so clever at arranging ourselves, as a result of which a lot of the money was hot money, which is what's been pulled out, right? The foreign investment which came in, which has been pulled out. And of course, there's a lot of money that Indians had in India because you're earning 12%, 15% on it, which has suddenly now shrunk. And as it shrunk, the incentive to keep it in India has gone down. So a lot of money has gone out. Indian money has gone out, legally and illegally. And that's the reason why, of course, we're hit.
But with the kind of economy that India has right now, like how do you encourage the food security bill or FDI, which will have a huge impact on the whole financial sector that India is facing now? Like, for example, like the global economy was not having an impact on the common men before, like maybe like 7-10 years ago.
Yes.
And now we experience the direct impact. Just because one example I can say that the petrol price, which has a huge impact.
Yes.
And it destroys everything. Like the poor people are getting poorer just because of the increase. Like when the government is not able to sort out the issue, which is very sensitive and which is very urgent, like don't you think that the government is just trying to implement the food security bill, just keeping the elections in the mind? Because
Well, certainly.
like Congress has been ruling for 9 years, and they just passed the food security bill just 7
Sure.
months before the election.
Sure.
And
Sure.
how do you think that bill will be effective and just in a goodwill or in an election point of view?
Well, all I can say is what you say is perfectly true. I don't disagree with you. They've been ruling all these years. They could have brought it in a long time ago. But the fact of the matter is, when a good thing is done, even if it's done late, it's better for a good thing to be done than not to be done. So basically, you have to decide, is the food security bill a good thing or a bad thing? Once you've decided it's a good thing, I mean, if you disagree it's a good thing, that's fine, we can debate that. But once you decide it's a good thing, then it's better for it to be brought in than not brought in.
Yeah, I don't say it's a bad thing, but like tons of bills are passed. Like we have a bill against dowry system, we have a bill against child labor system, and we have a bill against untouchability, all these things. Nothing has been implemented properly. Like how do you think that the new bill will be implemented properly, and which just conceals the other bill that I'm talking about is not financially encouraged. Like it doesn't involve any financial matter.
Correct.
Like child labor, like even you can come to even the cities, the main
Yes.
city.
Yeah.
Even to the poor villages, the child labor is everywhere.
Sure.
And the bill is also everywhere. Like, how do we expect a bill which is logically has to be implemented, then financially has to be implemented, will be effective?
You know, if you look
How can we be happy and proud of the bills being passed in the parliament?
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. But if you look at implementation, you will find that those bills that have financial consequences, in other words, are paid for by the central government, tend to be better implemented than those which do not have financial implications for the government. And the reason is because those kinds of bills, like the abolition of prohibition of scavenging bill, strike somehow at the roots of our culture. They strike at the whole way our socio-economic system is set up. They are much more difficult to implement. Abolition of untouchability, very difficult to implement, because it's to do with values. It's to do with the way you live. It's to do with where you live. You know, we have a caste segregation in our villages and in all our old towns. So if you tell me which part of the city you come from, I can tell you what caste you are. If you tell me what part of the village you come, I can tell you what caste you are. Your name can be whatever. You know, we have had this new phenomenon of people dropping their surnames and caste names, and even adopting the names of higher castes. You just tell me where you come from, I can tell you what caste you are. You know? So in that context, it becomes very difficult to abolish untouchability. But if you look at those things that have meant that cash has to go down from the government to the person on the ground, okay, you know, what was the famous statement? I think it's Rajiv Gandhi said 17 paise goes down out of every rupee, 17% actually reaches the ground. God knows where he got those figures from. Maybe it's 5%, maybe it's 20%, who knows? But the fact is, from a poor person's point of view, who is living on 20 rupees a day, you know, if he or she gets one free meal at lunchtime, his child or her child gets a free meal, it's a huge thing. Even if the meal is not good quality, it's still a huge thing. So if you look at these things like, you know, midday meal for children, if you look at things like the Mahatma Gandhi, you know, compulsory employment, no, guarantee of employment bill, if you look at things like that, they've had an impact. They've not had enough of an impact, they are riddled with corruption, all that is true. But the poor person doesn't think, I should have got 50 rupees, and I didn't, because probably the guy doesn't know he should have got 50 rupees. He has actually got 2 rupees. He's happy he's got 2 rupees. And we should also be happy he's at least got 2 rupees. We should not be happy he didn't get the 48 rupees. We should be happy he's got 2 rupees. So, you know, in India we have to be a little ambiguous about these things. We have to say, good the guy got 2 rupees, tragedy the guy didn't get 48 rupees. How can we get more of the 48 rupees to this guy? And the trouble with us is, you know, we're great at academic debates, we're great at theorizing, we're great at debating, but, you know, not many of us go down into the details of why the thing doesn't work and come up with proposals to how to set it right. But thank God some of us do. So a few business people, a few NGOs got together and created something called the Right to Information Act. Again, not functioning perfectly. But Right to Information Act was a huge step forward for our country. I know government is trying to cut it down and so on and so forth. Elite interests will always try to reduce accountability. But there was a huge step forward. Public interest litigation didn't exist, did not exist, but was created. It's created because some of us, Right to Information Act is very similar to similar legislation in the United States. Public interest litigation does not exist in the United States. But you as a citizen can write to the Supreme Court or to the local court or to the state court and say, I would like to bring to your attention a matter of public interest. And the court can take it up. Even though nobody has filed a case. Nobody has filed a case. The court can take up the case as a matter of public interest. This legislation doesn't exist. It's a legal innovation. We should be proud of it. How many Indians are proud of public interest litigation? How many debates do you hear about it? We are a very curious culture. On the one hand, we are proud, but we are proud theoretically, When you look at specific things we can be proud about, we are not, because we don't even know these things half the time.
Yeah, the attitude of the Indians always like, the government takes an action which has an immediate impact on the people, like suddenly like 3 rupee decrease in the petrol price last night, and it's a huge impact on the people. The people always want to have a look at something that has an impact on their, like the next day they take the motorbikes and then they see a 3 rupee drop in the price. That's what the people expect.
Yeah.
And the people are not against or not in favor of this kind of bill. They are just neutral. And always, like we have in Tamil Nadu, we have a free meal program.
Yes.
And it's served in all the schools, all the government schools, and it's well implemented. And it's one of the, like, it was implemented back in 1960s, and it's still implemented and in a very fair way. And we agree everything, but with the changing scenario, with the burning thing, which is right now, with the people experiencing something like especially with the inflation and the conversion of dollar to the Indian economy, and with the petrol price, like these people want to have some solution for this kind of thing, which the government is just now. Maybe, as you mentioned, like nobody can have a solution for this immediately, but people are just skeptical with having a leadership which is completely...
Well, I have good news for you. My view is that the Indian economy has sunk to the level that it can sink before the elections. If after the elections we have a political impasse, I don't know what's going to happen. But let's pray that it won't be a political impasse. There'll be a clear kind of leadership. Well, can be a coalition of parties, that's fine. But it's clear leadership committed to actually implementing things, not just passing bills, as you were saying. If we can have that kind of commitment, whichever party it is, whichever leader it is, then the economy will zoom back before you know what's happening to 7%, 8%. We don't want to belong to the American sphere of influence. We don't want to belong to the Russian sphere. We want to be non-aligned. What kind of beast is that? It didn't exist. India said, no, we've had enough colonialism, we want neither British colonialism, nor American colonialism, nor Russian colonialism, we want to do what's right for ourselves. Now, that means sometimes you'll agree with America, sometimes you'll agree with Russia, or whatever. Actually, when you look at our voting record in the United Nations, we never once supported the United States. Even though the United States gave us more foreign aid than Russia did. Maybe that was our way of being independent, I don't know. But the fact is, we had political clout. When that doctrine became obsolete as a result of the fall of the Berlin Wall, that coincided more or less with the loss of political consensus in India. The political consensus had actually been declining before that, and Mrs. Gandhi's reign at the time of the emergency kind of crystallized that. And in my mind, if you're students of Indian history and economics and so on, as Dr. Nair here is, then obviously we can debate that. But my reading is that it was with the emergency, 1975-76, that the political consensus began to really crack. There had always been differences on the margins, but that's really what cracked it. And since that time, we've never had political consensus. We've been able to drive certain things through, like the new Indo-US relationship, which has come and kind of lost its shine, but nevertheless legally still exists. But we don't have political consensus around it. And because we don't have political consensus around it, we've not been able to make of it what we could have made of it. I'm not saying that we should be driven by the United States in a political sense, but the fact is that an economic relationship of the sort that we have with the United States could be exploited much more if we had the right political framework to manage that. What there could be built, I think, political consensus around would be a doctrine, if you want to call it that, of foreign policy that suits us in our immediate context. But we've not done that because we've gone into a position of opposition for the sake of opposition. If you look at the Muzaffarnagar riots which took place last month, the 7th of September, if I remember correctly, 40,000 people were displaced out of the small district, all Muslims. Now, you may have a political view about Muslims, you may have another political view about Muslims, different matter. But when citizens of your country, 40,000 of them are displaced by organized violence on the part of whoever, and you want at this time in political history to project yourself as a national leader, the least you can do is to take interest in what's going on. Right? When Manmohan Singh calls a national conference of chief ministers, what happens? 16 turn up, 13 do not turn up. This is the worst incidents of breakdown of law and order. Let's forget about anything else. Yeah? It's the incidents of breakdown of law and order, as a result of which 40,000 people are internally displaced. What is the reaction? You know, as I explained, we don't have political consensus on a simple thing like unified rules of admission at university. When something so totally politically non-contestable as that is made an issue of contention, how can you expect there to be consensus about anything else? The result of that is, of course, China has run rings around us. So now we are in a situation where India is completely politically constrained. You know, Burma is in China's pocket, Sri Lanka is in China's pocket, Pakistan is in China's pocket. So, you know, we really have no room to move even inside our own area of influence. So from India's point of view, it will be very good if China's power goes down. The question is, how fast is China's power going to go down? If it goes down kind of abruptly, then of course the politicians there will have to do whatever they can to distract the attention of their local population, their own population. And the great challenge is, what are they going to do? Obviously internal control as far as possible. When and if that breaks, then they have to launch external adventures. And the question is, where will they launch external adventures? They can launch it against Russia, unlikely. Japan, possible. Taiwan, possible. Southeast Asia, very possible, much smaller countries. India, very possible. And then Kyrgyzstan, I mean, okay. And my assessment is India is one of the soft targets. And if you watch what the Chinese have been doing in terms of testing our resolve on the borders, what Pakistan has been doing in terms of testing our resolve, at a time when we are in politically, in the doldrums, then we should be watching it very carefully. It doesn't matter whether you're, one side or the other side of the political divide in India, but there is no national debate about it. You're not watching what the Chinese are doing, missing the game. So we're missing the advantage we could get from America, we're missing the threat that's coming from China. We are living in a kind of fool's paradise. It's not paradise, kind of fool's hell or something. So it's a depressing situation. But of course, it's when a situation is depressing that things can happen. So I'm hoping, actually in hope, not in anything else, in God, if you like, that something will move, as a result of which we will stop being blind to our own problems, and we will stop being blind to our own opportunities and really begin to move. And I think the prospects are there, because if you look at all the small parties that are being formed, on a very innovative kind of basis, not the old kind of personality basis, but very innovative parties coming into being, then you say, oh, maybe something can happen. There's the Aam Aadmi Party, which is probably going to sweep the elections in Delhi, as far as we can tell from surveys at the moment. This is the party that's come out of the great anti-corruption drive in India. Again, you may be for Kejriwal, you may be against Kejriwal, but it's probably going to sweep Delhi, and it's probably going to be a good thing, because it breaks this mold of two corrupt parties. I mean, wherever you may stand, you can't fail to recognize Congress is corrupt and BJP is corrupt, and our regional parties are corrupt. So the only hope is new parties. They may also become corrupt, but at least they start fresh, right? You look at the Professionals Party, not a great record of success so far, but it's a new party. Adarsh Rashtriya Vikas Party, new party. And so there's a score or more of these little parties that have sprung up, each with their different potential and prospects. And I think the great hope is that some of these parties will actually get together. There's an ex-IS officer who emigrated to Australia who's come back and wants to start, actually has started a new party. There's a party that's trying to get all the Dalits, OBCs, and minorities together, because that, of course, represents the majority of the country. With Dalits, OBCs, and minorities together, can you get them together? I don't know. If you get them together, are you getting them together for the right reasons or the wrong reasons? Right policies, wrong policies. Can you actually implement anything? Yeah, all these are questions. But nevertheless, things are happening. There is a kind of grassroots energy and a kind of grassroots movement. And maybe we will get a third front. Maybe we'll get a third alternative, which is much more creative, new, fresh, maybe. If nothing else, it can infuse the old parties. BJP comes in with a third front supporting. Congress comes in, new BJP, new support as BJP. I personally don't care. I care that we get a government that's committed to implementation of any policy, however theoretically wrong it may be. Because a policy that is implemented, even a bad policy that's implemented, is better than a good policy that's not implemented.
Sure.
I think my last question is over, and I think it's past 8, or nearly past 8.
Close to it.
Thank you very much for being attentive listeners. Thank you for your time. I've enjoyed being with you. I should also say, as I always say, because I make politically incorrect statements, we have a saying in North India, Gustakhi maaf, which means if I've inadvertently done something to offend you, it is not my intention to offend you. I've just been sharing things as I see them, and I hope I've not been, pro one party or pro. I'm not trying to score political points. I'm just trying to be academically objective, and if I've hurt you, that's not been the intention.